He was already standing on the shoulder before the headlights reached him. No car had passed for 30 miles, and the rest stop he asked for had burned down in 1996. Route 17 cuts through the Nevada desert like a scar that never healed. Long stretches run without cell service, without gas stations, without anything but rock and wind and the hum of tires on asphalt. Truckers know the lonely segments by heart. Mile marker 223 is one of them. It's where drivers say the temperature drops for no reason, where radios crackle with empty static, where something sometimes stands just beyond the reach of high beams. Caleb Morrow had driven that highway for 12 years. He didn't believe in roadside stories. He believed in fuel receipts, delivery windows, and keeping both hands steady on the wheel. But that night, a little after 1:30 a.m., he saw the figure waiting ahead, and routine cracked open. The man stood just past the faded mile sign, boots planted on gravel, one arm raised in a hitchhiker signal that looked too deliberate to be desperate. He wore dark work pants and a buttoned jacket despite the desert heat. His head was slightly lowered, brim of an old cap shadowing his face. Caleb slowed automatically. It wasn't kindness exactly, it was reflex. No one walked that stretch without trouble. He rolled down the passenger window halfway. The desert air smelled of dust and dry sage. "Where you headed?" Caleb asked. The man lifted his face just enough for the headlights to catch pale skin stretched tight over sharp features. His eyes were darker than the night behind him. "Rest stop," he said. His voice was steady, almost flat. "Up ahead." Caleb frowned. There was no rest stop ahead. The only one that had ever existed near mile 223 had burned in a grease fire decades ago. Only a concrete slab and a warped signpost remained. "That place is gone," Caleb replied. The hitchhiker didn't blink. "I know," he said softly. Something in the way he said it, not confused, not mistaken, unsettled Caleb more than the request itself. Against better judgment, he unlocked the passenger door. The man climbed in without hesitation. The cab filled with a faint scent, not sweat, not dirt, but something metallic and dry, like overheated brakes. He closed the door gently. No gravel shifted beneath his boots as he stepped in. Caleb noticed that detail later. They drove in silence. The dashboard clock ticked from 1:32 to 1:33. The hitchhiker kept his hands folded in his lap. They were pale and oddly stiff, fingers slightly curled as if molded that way. "Truck breakdown?" Caleb tried. "Something like that," he answered. His eyes remained fixed forward. The desert rolled past in endless darkness, broken only by the sweep of headlights. Caleb told himself it was just another quiet passenger. Still, he couldn't shake the awareness of the man's presence beside him, not heavy, not shifting with the motion of the truck, almost as if he weighed nothing against the seat. "You from around here?" Caleb asked. The man's head tilted slightly. "Been here a long time." The words felt layered, like more than a simple statement. Caleb's gaze flicked to the side mirror and back. The highway behind them was empty. "What's your name?" he asked. A pause stretched too long. "Doesn't matter," the hitchhiker said. "You'll drop me where you always do." Caleb's hands tightened on the wheel. "I've never been out here with you before." The man finally turned his head. His face, caught in dashboard glow, looked wrong in subtle ways. The skin too smooth across the cheeks, the lips slightly cracked but without moisture. His eyes reflected no light. "You have," he said. "You just don't remember." A mile marker slid past, 221. Caleb swallowed. The air inside the cab had grown colder. He reached to adjust the temperature dial, but the heater was already blowing warm. The cold wasn't mechanical. It pressed inward from the passenger side, seeping across the console. "That rest stop burned down," Caleb said again, more firmly this time. "There's nothing there." The hitchhiker's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it held any warmth. "There was," he replied. "That's enough." The road sign for mile 223 appeared ahead, reflective paint catching the headlights. As Caleb passed it, the radio snapped into sudden static. A low hiss filled the cab, then a brief burst of something like distant voices layered together. Caleb reached to turn it off, but before his hand touched the knob, the hitchhiker's note quietly. "This is good." The words came just as the dark outline of the old rest stop slab came into view, a rectangle of pale concrete beside the highway, half swallowed by sand. Caleb slowed. He didn't know why he slowed. He should have kept driving. Instead, he eased the truck onto the shoulder near the ruins. The headlights washed over the empty slab. The burned signpost still leaned crooked near the entrance. Caleb turned toward the passenger seat. It was empty. The door was closed. The seatbelt hung undisturbed. Caleb's breath caught. He hadn't heard the door open, hadn't felt a shift in weight. He threw the truck in park and stepped out. The desert night pressed close, silent except for the ticking engine. He circled to the passenger side and pulled the door open. The seat was cold to the touch, not cool from air conditioning, cold like metal left in shade. Then he saw them. Boot prints in the dust beside the truck. Fresh. Leading away from the passenger door toward the old rest stop slab. Caleb's pulse roared in his ears. The prints were deep, distinct, and spaced evenly. They moved across the gravel and onto the concrete. Halfway across the slab they stopped. Not faded, not turned back, just ended,
as if the walker had stepped forward into air and vanished. Caleb stood frozen, staring at the final imprint. A gust of wind swept across the desert, lifting dust in a low spiral. For a moment, the dust seemed to gather into shape beyond the slab, a standing figure outlined in moving sand. The outline lifted one arm slightly, as if in farewell. Then the wind shifted, and the shape collapsed back into emptiness. Caleb returned to his truck and drove without looking in the mirrors. He did not report the incident. He did not tell other drivers. He convinced himself exhaustion could conjure anything at that hour. But 3 weeks later, on another late haul along Route 17, his headlights caught the same figure at mile marker 223. Same stance, same raised arm. Caleb's stomach dropped. He did not slow this time. He kept the accelerator steady and drove past. As he did, the man turned his head to follow the truck's motion. Caleb saw his face clearly in the side mirror, not blurred now, but cracked like scorched porcelain, thin lines splitting across pale skin. The eyes were darker than before, deep and empty, and the mouth moved. Even through closed windows and engine noise, Caleb heard the words as if whispered directly into his ear. "You missed your stop." The radio burst to life with layered static and something beneath it, a low, steady breathing that did not belong to him. Caleb drove faster, refusing to look again. When he finally checked the passenger seat hours later at a fuel stop, he found dust scattered across the fabric. Fine dust shaped into the faint impression of someone sitting there, and on the floor mat below, a single boot print facing forward, as if the hitchhiker had never left at all. Truckers still talk about mile 223 in quiet tones. Some say if you stop, he disappears. Others say if you don't stop, he rides with you anyway. But they all agree on one thing. No matter what you choose, when you pass the burned rest stop, you are not alone in the cab.
The emergency broadcast began at 2:13 a.m. It used a frequency that had been dead for 40 years, and it was coming from inside Coldwater Asylum. No one monitored that band anymore, except insomniacs and radio hobbyists who like to sweep forgotten emergency channels for stray signals. Martin Keller was one of them. He lived alone outside Dayton and filled his nights with static and distant transmissions bouncing off the atmosphere. When the signal cut through his receiver that morning, it came in clean and steady, like a live hospital dispatch. A woman's voice, calm and controlled, spoke with clinical authority. Code Gray and Ward C, assistance required, patient restraint in progress. There was a soft click, then 3 seconds of silence, then the exact same sentence repeated, in the same tone, the same breathing pattern, the same timing between words. Martin froze, hand hovering over the recorder. Coldwater Asylum had shut down in 1983 after an electrical fire tore through the east wing. It had been abandoned ever since, fenced and boarded, scheduled for demolition that never happened. Its emergency radio tower had been dismantled. The frequency was listed as inactive in every registry. Yet the voice continued, repeating the call without variation. Martin recorded 27 minutes before the transmission stopped abruptly mid-sentence. He replayed it twice, certain it was a prank or a rebroadcast from some archival loop. But there was no distortion, no background hum of modern equipment, only faint ambient noise beneath the voice, something like distant ventilation or movement in a large hollow space. He checked the signal strength. It peaked strongest when he angled the antenna southwest, toward the wooded acreage where Coldwater still stood. Against better judgment, curiosity took hold. By dawn, he had printed old maps and packed a handheld scanner, flashlight, and spare batteries. Coldwater Asylum loomed beyond a collapsed chain-link fence at the end of a cracked service road. The brick facade had blackened from fire damage decades ago. Windows gaped empty or boarded shut. Vines climbed the walls like veins. The place had the kind of silence that presses against your ears, as if sound itself avoids lingering. Martin parked a quarter-mile away and walked in. The air smelled of damp leaves and stale ash. Up close, the building felt larger than photographs suggested, 5 stories with 2 wings stretching back into trees. The old radio tower base remained near the courtyard, just a concrete pad with bolts protruding where metal once stood. He switched on his scanner. Static filled the speaker. Then, faint but unmistakable, the voice returned. Code Gray and Ward C, assistance required, patient restraint in progress. It was weaker outdoors, but still present. The signal strength spiked as he approached the main entrance. The double doors hung open, warped from fire. Inside, the lobby ceiling had partially collapsed. Sunlight filtered through broken beams, illuminating dust thick as fog. Martin stepped carefully over debris, heart pounding in rhythm with the repeated broadcast. The deeper he moved into the asylum, the stronger the transmission became. The repetition never changed, never faltered. The voice did not sound distressed. It sounded procedural, routine, as though an incident was unfolding in real time. He followed old painted signs toward Ward C, guided more by signal strength than memory of floor plans.
Corridors stretched long and narrow, paint peeling in curling strips. Patient rooms lined both sides, doors either missing or hanging at angles. The air grew colder the farther he walked, and the smell shifted from mildew to something metallic and old. When he reached Ward C, the scanner crackled sharply. The voice played louder, almost as if spoken nearby rather than transmitted. Code Gray in Ward C. Assistance required. Patient restraint in progress. Martin stepped into the ward hallway. At its center stood a nurse's station enclosed in cracked glass. Papers lay scattered across the counter, fused together by age. As he crossed the threshold, the repetition stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the broadcast. Then came a different sound, a low, dragging shuffle from one of the patient rooms. Martin turned slowly. The scanner emitted a burst of static, then a new addition beneath the familiar voice. Breathing, not part of the recording, but present in the hallway with him. Shallow, labored. He backed toward the nurse's station. From the third room on the left, something shifted against the floor. A metal bed frame screeched softly. Code Gray in Ward C, the voice resumed. But this time it did not come from the scanner. It came from behind the nurse's desk. Martin's throat tightened. He forced himself to look. Behind the cracked glass stood a figure in a nurse's uniform darkened by soot. The fabric clung unnaturally to the body beneath it, as if melted and hardened together. The face was wrong, features blurred like wax left near flame, yet the mouth moved with perfect articulation. Assistance required, patient restraint in progress. The eyes did not blink. They fixed on Martin with clinical focus, as though evaluating compliance. The dragging sound grew louder. Doors along the hallway began to creak open one by one. From within, silhouettes emerged, patients in hospital gowns, their movements jerking and uneven, limbs stiff from imagined restraints. Some bore blackened streaks across skin. Others had impressions around wrists and ankles where straps might have once held them. They did not rush him. They simply stepped into the corridor and turned their heads toward the nurse's station. The nurse figure tilted its head slightly. Restraint required, it repeated, voice flattening into distortion. The hallway lights flickered on above him. Impossible, as no electricity fed the building. Fluorescent bulbs hummed and cast a sickly green glare over peeling walls. The patients began to advance in unison, slow synchronized steps echoing against tile. Martin stumbled backward, scanner falling from his grip. The device hit the floor and skidded toward the nurse's station, still broadcasting the same looping call. He ran. The corridor seemed longer now, stretching beyond its original length. Doors slammed shut behind him without visible hands. The fluorescent bulbs burst one by one overhead, showering glass. The voice followed him through the ward, no longer confined to a single location, but resonating through vents and walls. Code Gray in Ward C, assistance required. The patient's footsteps quickened. Their breathing filled the air, layered and desperate. Martin reached the lobby and burst through the front doors into gray daylight. The moment he crossed the threshold, the building went silent. No lights, no voices, only wind moving through trees. He did not stop running until he reached his car. That night, back home, he reviewed his recording. The original transmission played clearly for 27 minutes. At minute 28, where the broadcast had cut off before, a new segment appeared. It began with his own voice inside Ward C, whispering, "Is someone here?" Then the nurse's reply, close to the microphone, "Assistance required." The final audio was the sound of multiple footsteps surrounding the recorder, and then, in Martin's own voice, perfectly calm and repeating in even cadence, "Code Gray in Ward C, assistance required, patient restraint in progress."